A TikTok user was flying home from New York City to Toronto, Canada, late at night and noticed one strange thing that turned into a viral video. She glanced at her neighbor's screen, which showed 27°C, which is around 80 degrees Fahrenheit in the corner. Then, she saw that the person in front of them had 26°C, closer to 79, on their screensaver. Since the rest of the screensaver was a tropical landscape, she figured out it must be the destination temperature in Celsius. But nope, she was heading to Toronto in late October, far from tropical dreams. So what did that temperature stand for, and why on earth was it different for different seats? It took her a while to realize that the numbers and letters actually stood for passengers' seat locations. Plenty of fellow TikTok users supported the video's author and said that they had to read the comments to figure out what was going on. It's actually not so wrong. The aircraft is usually divided into several zones. Each of them normally has its own air conditioning system controller. These gadgets look similar to home thermostat panels, except every panel has separate dial settings for each cabin zone. So there can totally be slightly different temperatures depending on where you're sitting on the plane. But crew members mostly set the temperature somewhere between 71 degrees Fahrenheit and 75 degrees Fahrenheit to make you feel at home. This is the temp you're most likely to set on your AC at home, right? And because all people have different body temperatures, the airplane crew mostly aims for the lower end of that spectrum, especially during morning and afternoon flights in the summer. Feeling a bit chilly is definitely better than sweating, as stuffy air makes it harder for passengers to breathe. And those who have motion sickness might feel even worse in a warm temperature while flying through turbulence. Conditioned air from the cabin also goes into the cargo hold in the belly of the plane. It gets a little cooler by the time it reaches there. Plus, the cargo area is less insulated than the cabin, so it's mostly around 44 degrees Fahrenheit in a Boeing 767 cargo hold. The bulk area where pets are traveling can get as warm as 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Depending on the plane's position, it comes from three main sources. When a plane is parked at the gate, it often uses air from the ground. This air, called preconditioned air (PCA), comes from a big air conditioning machine on the ground. You might notice a big yellow tube connected to the plane. This is how the ground air gets inside. Sometimes a gas-powered air car can be used instead. Ground air is usually powered by electricity, which is cheaper, cleaner, and quieter than running the plane's engines. But it doesn't always keep the cabin cool enough, especially on hot days or if the tube gets kinked. Cities like Las Vegas and Phoenix, which have very hot weather, have some of the best ground air systems in the US to handle the heat. The second source of air aboard is the APU, or Auxiliary Power Unit. It's like a mini-engine in the tail of the plane. It's the second option for cooling or heating the cabin, especially if ground air isn't available. The APU can work even on the hottest days. During quick stops, the APU might stay on the whole time to keep the air inside comfortable. If the plane is preparing to leave the gate, the APU gets switched on just before the ground air is disconnected. The plane's main engines can also provide air for the cabin. This happens when the engines are running, usually after pushback or during the flight. The engines can keep the cabin cool or warm while also managing the plane's pressurization. If the cabin feels too hot or cold, pilots can fix it if they start the engines early. If not, they can use other sources of air. This might not always work, especially when the temperatures are going up and planes get extra hot just sitting on the runway. One flight attendant shares the story of how she felt hot, dizzy, confused, and then blacked out aboard. Another flight in Florida was delayed an hour because it was 93 degrees inside the cabin. The gate agent told the passengers they had to wait for it to drop to at least 85 degrees to board the plane safely. The sun wasn't even up yet at that time. Sadly, the external AC units and the auxiliary-powered cooling systems don't always work properly because of maintenance issues. You can increase your chances of feeling comfortable on the flight if you look up the flight number and what type of plane it uses. Newer planes will have more advanced onboard technology. Some will even have temperature regulation by now. so you'll only have to fight a couple of neighbors to get to the temperature you prefer. But then there's also the cost control problem. Some airlines make their pilots save money on fuel and maintenance and won't let them use the auxiliary power unit and other engines while the plane is at the gate or on the runway. If they use too much fuel for AC on the ground, they might have to refuel later on. Another big problem with hot weather is how it affects takeoff. Planes are very heavy and gravity pulls them down to the ground. To get into the sky, they need lift, which is the force that opposes the weight of the airplane and holds it in the air. When the air gets hotter, it expands, which means there are fewer air molecules to push the plane upward. For every rise of 5.4 degrees Fahrenheit, an airplane loses about 1% of its lift. So, in really hot weather, it can be much harder for planes to take off, and if it gets too hot, it might even be impossible. The problem is especially tricky at airports in high places, where the air is already thinner, and at airports with short runways, which give planes less time to speed up. For example, at 68 degrees Fahrenheit, a plane might need a runway that's 6,500 feet long to take off. But if it's 104 degrees Fahrenheit, the same plane would need 8,200 feet of runway. In 2018, because of a heat wave in London, they had to remove passengers from 14 flights. It happened at London City Airport, which has shorter runways than other airports in the area. So they have to take off at a steeper angle. It would have been impossible if the plane had been loaded to the max, and they would have had to use a lot of extra fuel to make it fly. On one flight, they had to ask 20 passengers to stay behind. Since no one volunteered not to fly to Ibiza, they had to choose them at random. This made the plane lighter and let it take off safely. Scientists have also noticed that headwinds that help the plane take off have slowed down by about 2.3 knots every decade. It reduced the maximum takeoff weight for planes. If you're more worried about the cold than the heat, there's some good news for you. Since planes fly at almost 40,000 feet above the ground, they can perfectly survive freezing temps of around -70 degrees Fahrenheit. They keep the fuel warm on the ground, and once the plane is flying, the engine heats it up, so it works perfectly even in the icy skies. Cold air actually helps planes fly better because it's denser than warm air, which means they can take off more quickly and fly more efficiently. But cold weather has its challenges, like ice and snow. If snow or ice sticks to important parts of the plane, like the wings, it can mess up the smooth airflow that helps the plane fly. To fix this, ground staff sprays the wings with heated antifreeze liquid to melt the snow and ice. When the plane is flying, the wings stay ice-free because the engine's hot air warms them up and the plane's speed prevents snow from sticking.
That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like and share it with your friends. Or if you want more, just click on these videos and stay on the bright side.